But before I introduce Campbell and today's topic, let me just tell you about some upcoming events. Obviously, as with CIPD just now, everything is online. On the 10th of November, we have the Hidden Carer in Your Team with Roisin Conley. Then on the 1st of December, we've got, it seems like a similar event to this, but it's actually aimed specifically at students or those just getting into employment. And it's called Making the Most of Yourself, and that's with Stacey Edgehill. Then on the 2nd of December, we've got a busy week that week. We've got what we've learnt, remote learning 6 months on. I think it'll actually be about 8 months on by then. Kathy Christie did an event for us early on in lockdown. And she's coming back to find out what lessons we've actually learnt about learning remotely. And then on 3rd of December, it's our last event of the year. We've got an employment law quiz with Alison Wood and Sean Saludra. And for those of you that haven't heard already, we're going to do that via breakout rooms. So you'll be in a team. So if you're like me and you're not an employment law specialist, you'll be hoping that you get somebody in your team who is, because I'm uber competitive. But that's the events for the rest of the year. As ever, you can, the one with Stacey, we just agreed that yesterday, so it won't be on the website yet or Eventbrite, but it will be in the coming days. The others are already there. You're more than welcome to go and sign in and join up with that. But this afternoon it is now. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Campbell Urquhart of White Cube Consulting as our speaker today. As many of you'll know, Campbell's got over 30 years of experience in recruitment and selection, HR consultancy, organisational development and outplacement. He's led and managed teams and helped deliver a wide range of HR and people-related consultancy projects with over £50 million worth in value in 17 different countries and across 4 continents. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass you over to Campbell, and he is going to explain to us about how we can get back into employment after redundancy. Campbell, over to you. Oh, should say, just before that, if you've got questions, if you could put them in the chat box and we'll manage them that way, that would be absolutely fantastic. Sorry, Campbell, over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate the intro. For the record, 30 years experience. Clearly, I started when I was 5, and that's not up for debate. I guess I don't need to cover the introduction to White Cube. I guess that's been very professionally delivered. I guess in terms of my own background, just a little bit more on that. I've worked within broadly the field of HR for the best part of 30 years. I'm also on an advisory board for the University of Aberdeen, and for the best part of a year been a business advisor with Firstport, who help social enterprises start up and grow. What I hope that I can bring to the table today is I wouldn't consider myself an expert in anything. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. So what I'll try and do is bring elements of that 30 odd years experience to the table and try and look at, I suppose, the whole area of CV development, job search and interview preparation, partly from a candidate's perspective, given I would assume the majority of you are maybe in that category, but also hopefully what I hope you'll find useful is to also think about it from the employer's perspective and sort of marrying those 2 areas together. So without further ado, in terms of the agenda, I'm going to talk first of all a bit about creating an effective CV. I'm going to talk then a bit about job search, and following on from that, sort of interview skills, and I guess the key word there is preparation. I suppose, how do you fully and thoroughly prepare for a employment interview? As has been mentioned, if anyone's got any questions, if you pop those into the chat function, I'll leave those to the end. We will have time towards the end of the session to go through any questions that anyone may have. So I'm going to start with the most blindingly obvious question. We'll do a Zoom. You've got an employment law quiz coming up. I'm going to do a quick Zoom quiz. You don't need to answer this, but have a think about the answer. If I was to ask you what a CV is, or what's I suppose the purpose of a CV, when I ask this question, I do a lot of outplacement. When I ask this question, for anyone who would say something like, it's a summary of my skills, experience, knowledge, qualifications, I'll give you half a point. To get the full point, if you have said it's some or all of that, but its primary purpose in life is a sales tool to get you an interview, you'll get a full, you can award yourself a full point. So in very basic terms, in terms of developing an effective CV, you really need to sell yourself. And I guess I'll try and walk you through what I mean by that, and particularly in relation to, I'm going to use the word relevant several times throughout this part of the session. Selling yourself as relevant to the role that you're applying for, and that can obviously vary. So I appreciate talking to an audience, if not exclusively, primarily of HR professionals. I would hope I don't need to tell you what needs to go into a CV. However, I'll share I suppose, my own thoughts on what, I'm not a great believer in handing out a template and saying complete this, but for me, a good CV should contain some, if not all, of the following. Very obviously, contact details. Most CVs I see nowadays, I'm sure you'll be the same, there'll be some sort of summary profile, personal profile. An area that I always encourage people to think about is, if they don't have specifically an achievement section in their CV, to at least think about their key achievements, and also skills. So skills could be technical skills, IT skills, commercial, financial, people management. And I'm going to talk a bit more about those three areas in particular. Work history, pretty much a given, so where you've been employed. Qualifications and training. I guess depending on how relevant, again, your qualifications and training are, I would say that can maybe have a bearing on how high up the sort of pecking order in your CV they should appear. So the more, I suppose, the higher level and the more relevant qualifications, I would tend to place those higher up the CV. Things like hobbies and interests, I always think very much an optional, and my rule of thumb, as maybe not a direct advice, but as guidance, if a hobby or interest is, if it adds value to your application, so, you know, without being, I'm not meaning this in any way critical, walking the dog or reading books, nothing wrong with that. However, in relation to an application, it's maybe less likely to add value, whereas something like, I was speaking to someone recently who volunteers for the Duke of Edinburgh Award and takes young adults up the side of mountains and does leadership development with them and so on. That for me is much more relevant. So I would say, if you ask yourself the question, how relevant is that, and whether it should be included. There are a number of different types of CV. I'm going to touch on three, and for me they have slightly different purposes. The most common, certainly that I see, is what I would class as the reverse chronological CV. I'll also touch on a functional or skills-based and achievements-based CV. What I would tend to encourage people to think about is maybe a bit of a hybrid of the three to get the best of all of the different elements or approaches. So a reverse chronological, quite simply, is your focus primarily on your work experience. So in particular, for people who have got maybe a number of years experience, maybe as if any of you are recently qualified or maybe still studying, this can still be a useful format for the CV, but it tends to be experienced and work focused. The rule of thumb, again, I would apply is, if you're planning to stay in, say, a similar role, similar industry, it's a fairly straightforward approach to demonstrate the experience that you have in relation to maybe a similar sector or similar role. So that would be I guess that's the safe bet, the default position. As an alternative, and I would tend to say, for someone who's maybe looking to change role or industry, a skills or functional based CV can help. And I'll explain how that is just in a second. The difference would be, instead of focusing on your work experience, basically you condense that down to bare minimum, where you might just literally have your job title, employer, and dates employed, and maybe a very brief summary. And effectively what you do is you take all of the skills that you have and put them into themed sections. So finance skills, IT skills, management skills, HR, or even subsets of HR, employee engagement, communication, employment law, and so on. The reason I tend to find this approach can be more beneficial when you're looking to change role or industry is effectively you're playing down the focus on your previous experience in a specific role or sector and demonstrating that you have particularly transferable skills and ideally that are directly relevant to the role that you're applying for. The third version is an achievements-based CV, and I don't often recommend this approach. I suppose it would tend to suit someone who's maybe a serial entrepreneur, someone like a research academic or a professional sports person or whatever, where I suppose their achievements are maybe more, showcasing their achievements is maybe more important than their place of work or maybe their qualifications. So not to say not to think about that, but I guess what I would normally suggest is if you can get a mix of a good summary of your work experience in chronological order, think about pulling out some of your functional or skills and thinking about a section on that, and certainly your achievements. Hopefully you get the blend of all, the best of all three. I think it's safe to say in the current market, the likelihood of an increase in the volume of applications is pretty high. The last vacancy I advertised, I had to take it down after 3 days with 120 applications. And I guess that's going to be one of the challenges. And being completely honest, I tend not to see many what we class as bad CVs nowadays. Most CVs I see tend to be reasonably in reasonably decent shape. Therein lies the problem. How do you compete in a difficult market if everyone's CV is good? So the way I would get you to think about this is, talk about the 60-second rule. I'm sure we've all, if any of you've done any recruitment, we've all done it at some point. You'll get a bunch of applications in, you're busy with 101 things, and you need to do a sift through of who you're going to interview. So typically a first pass review of CVs may take, you may just spend a few seconds or a minute or two in each CV. So the more that you can think about grabbing attention, and I think two things: how do you grab attention with relevant content? And also thinking about where the content sits in your CV. So for me, the first half page to 2/3 of a page on your CV is prime advertising space. If I apply the 30 or 60-second rule, if I'm only going to read your CV for 60 seconds, you should really be positioning your CV to convey all the critical information in that, for me, in that first half page. So summary of your background, experience, attributes, any relevant skills you have in relation to the role, and particularly any key achievements and/or any relevant achievements. So it may not be your biggest achievement, but it may be directly relevant to the role that you're applying for. So the more you can think about, I suppose, tailoring this to suit the reader and not providing generic content, the more likely you are to gain their interest and at very least have them continue reading to the end of your CV, hopefully, and put you on the yes pile for interview. So some basics, I guess. This should all be common sense, I hope. CVs should be positive. should go without saying, and relevant to the role that you're applying for. You'll get bored of me saying the word relevant. They should also be succinct. I've been sent CVs that are 19 pages long. That's too long. I'll talk about CV length in a second. The skill in CV writing for me is to put all the essential information in, take out the non-essential information, declutter. Basically, it's like a garage clear out, get rid of all the stuff that isn't of use, and really focus and emphasize the content that is more relevant to the prospective reader. Again, goes without saying, your CV should be accurate and targeted. Any inaccuracies, all it takes is a date that's, you know, if you've got a gap in your CV, for example, make sure your dates tally, because if someone takes a reference and the dates don't tally, questions could be asked about not just that, but the rest of the content of your CV. And support any achievements with, I guess, key facts or supporting information. I get asked this question a lot: how long should my CV be? And the answer, I spoke to someone this morning and did some placement support, and the answer I gave them is the one I'll give you. It needs to be as long as it needs to be, which sounds a bit, well, maybe not definitive. I suppose by that, not too long, not too short, long enough to include all the key information, but not so long that you've got, it's full of waffle, basically. So use use bullet points to condense information, the short punchy sentences that have more impact. It's amazing, even just looking at this slide, you can convey, you know, information in 6 or 7 words. So don't use 30 words when 6 or 7 will do. In terms of design and presentation, I've got a very simple view on this, which is simple is best. Don't try and get too clever with graphic design unless you're a graphic designer. Keep it simple, use some white space, an easy to read font. Don't jump about from bold italics to, you know, 8 different font styles. Use a decent size font as well. If I'm going through 100 CVs and I find one that's difficult to read, there is an increased chance I might put it in the maybe pile rather than the yes pile. And a key point, and I'll talk you through what I mean by this in just 2 seconds. Use what I would call active language, or try and use more active language rather than passive language. So I'm sure if you're all experienced in the world of HR, I'm sure all of you will have seen a job spec. I suppose a typical approach for most people writing their CV is to take their current job spec, cut and paste that, and pop that into their CV, which is great. I would say that's a great starting point. The problem with the way job descriptions are, I suppose the purpose of a job description is to give a factual list of tasks and responsibilities that the role entails. So they're often written in what I would class as more passive language. Responsible for managing a team, duties include. It's not the most dynamic use of language. So I'll give you a little example of what I mean. First sentence on screen is what I would typically see in a job spec: responsible for managing the ABC project team and budget. That for me is it's a statement of fact. It tells you what the job entails, but it doesn't really sell it to you or sell what this person does. So if the top line is telling, the second sort of paragraph is selling. And the difference between the two is one is factual information, the other is, I suppose, a best version or a better version. So just to talk through I suppose the changes, using a word like led instead of responsible for. It's a minor change, but if I'm hiring someone, am I going to be looking for someone who could be responsible for a team or someone who's going to lead a team? And almost invariably, I'm going to be looking for a leader, not somebody who's going to turn up and be a caretaker, basically. By adding multidisciplinary and 30 technicians, what we've effectively added there is a sense of complexity. and also a gauge of scale and size. So not just managing a team, but a multidiscipline team of 30 people. And the real sales piece comes in, and this is bordering on I suppose, a mini achievement statement in its own right. To not just talk about what you're doing, but how well you're doing it. That's a key principle of selling yourself. Delivered the project 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 5% below budget through effective management. So using the word delivered, that's a more active word. Effective management, again, a more sort of dynamic or active type of language. And what we've done is quantify, you know, an indicative delivery below budget and such like. So I hope you can see the sort of key difference between those two statements. So some homework for you is have a look over your own CV and ask yourself, is this sentence or this paragraph telling or selling? And if it's telling, think about how you can use maybe a change in language to make it more dynamic, or to quantify or qualify things like size, scale, value, impact, percentage difference, you know, a change in improvement or something like that to make it sound more impressive. And this effectively is, so much of this is cosmetic packaging. It's like buying someone a gift at Christmas or their birthday and putting it in a plain cardboard box and brown wrapping paper. It doesn't look the most appealing. You can take the same gift and put it in a, you know, beautifully hand wrapped using, you know, gift with beautiful paper and a bow and a heartfelt handwritten card, and it makes all the difference. Really, this is what we're doing. It's window dressing, but effectively what we're doing is showcasing what we can offer to the best of our ability. So it's the best version of us. So I mentioned this earlier. For me, there's a number of ways you can sell yourself in your CV, but I think the three key areas to focus on and to really think about tailoring for the particular job is your personal profile. And I would say if you only ever change one part of your CV, assuming you have a personal profile, change that and try and write that as though you're a perfect match for the role. A couple of reasons for that. Basic human psychology. If I'm reading a CV and the first 8-10 lines of text, I'm thinking this person sounds perfect, I'm more inclined to continue reading or put them on the yes pile. The other two areas I would suggest thinking about emphasising or really customising are any key skills or transferable skills or key or relevant achievements, as I mentioned earlier. So, and again, I would typically suggest you think about those in the first sort of half page to 2/3 of a page of your CV, so that the reader sees, if you take your contact details and name aside, they'll see a summary of you as an individual, background, career, experience. They see the skills that you can bring to the organisation and any key achievements. So effectively you're saying, here's what I can bring to the organisation and here's how well I deliver. This is quite a short example of a personal profile, really, to get everything on one screen, basically. What I would, again, suggest, this is not a prescribed format, but in this example, I would tend to suggest starting with the first sentence or couple of sentences around your career to date, or if you're a student or recently qualified, your studies, your I suppose, studies to date. And I suppose the purpose of that is really, if all I read is that one sentence, I should get an idea of this person's background and general experience. In this example, I immediately know the person's degree in CIPD qualified, they're at senior HR business partner level, 20 years in the energy sector, and UK and overseas experience. So if you'd never met this person, you would have a reasonable idea of their career to date. The middle section, I would tend to suggest focusing on any, I'm going to use the word technical skills, I guess any competencies required, that's maybe the better word, any competencies required in the role. So in this instance, you know, employee engagement, performance management, reward, benefits, and so on. And then potentially finish with any, I suppose, any other attributes, soft skills. It could be commercial skills, financial skills, people management, leadership, whatever. So there's a bit of a structure there, and effectively what you're doing is you're starting off big picture, focusing on your technical or professional competencies, and then some of your sort of behavioural people type skills. I suppose the exception to the rule would be if you're applying for a job where personality is everything, and you know technical know-how is less important. You might change the running order. So again, just have a think about what's important to the reader. Don't just think about your skills or your qualities. Think about them in relation to what the reader's actually looking for, and prioritise those. So if that touches on the personal profile, if we start to think about achievement statements, I suppose really this is focusing on not what we do, but how well we do it. So think about what you've done well at work. What are you proudest of having delivered? They can be, well, ideally work-based or personal achievements, and either individual or as part of a team. So the only sort of point there, if you've worked as part of a team on and your team has delivered an achievement, make sure you don't claim full responsibility for it or take all the glory. Make sure you're clear that you can talk about being a key part of a team who, or instrumental team member as part of the team, or led a team who delivered. And the point at the bottom there, if you just go through your CV and just ask this, so you know, almost so what, it's back to this: am I telling or am I selling? And if I'm not selling, how can I make this sound more impressive? So a little formula that might help. And if I go back to anyone who cuts and pastes from their job spec, typically what a job spec will be is a list of actions and responsibilities. So if you do that, you'll tick the middle box there in terms of a list of actions, but what's often missing is what the challenge was or what the outcome or result was. And the result is often what sells what a candidate does. So for an achievement, what was the challenge, the problem you were facing, problem you had to solve? What did you do to deliver against it? And what was the outcome or outcomes? So as a quick example, the challenge in this example is achieving a 300k sales target. The action, and we've given an indication of how quickly, so 3 months in, on a 12-month contract for training and development of 200 technicians. So we've also given an idea of scale. And the bit that really sells this as an achievement is the 3 measures: 97% customer satisfaction, contract extension for 2 years. And I suppose the icing on the cake is if we go back to the original challenge, so set the challenge of delivering a 300k per annum target, and within 3 months effectively have delivered a contract worth 1.2 million. And if you also think about things like, sometimes using a percentage is better than an amount, sometimes a scale, so 200 technicians sounds more impressive than maybe a value. So have a think about, again, what's the best way to present the information. Finally, on CVs, particularly if you're customizing and amending them, always spell check and grammar check. There's no excuse for typos. Don't be modest. Try and use active rather than passive language, and definitely think about focusing on not just what you do, but how well you do it. So don't cut and paste. Well, you can cut and paste your job spec, but don't leave it at that. Think about how can I enhance it? How can I bring that to life and really talk about how well I've done my job, not just what I've done. And final point, to hammer this home, customize it, customize it, customize it. So many people they'll work on their CV and they'll send it out to 10 different companies and 10 different jobs, each one of which are looking for slightly different things. So it's worth taking 5 or 10 minutes just to tweak your CV And just ask yourself the question before you send it: have I got all the relevant information in? Is all the information in the right order? And do I need to emphasize, take out anything that's irrelevant or emphasize anything that is more relevant? If any of you have any questions on CV development, if you pop them into the chat, I'll deal with those at the end of the session. I hope that all makes sense. And you know, for me, almost all of that is common sense. And I suppose I'll close this part, the session out. I've read, I don't know how many, tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 plus CVs in my career. And I would say less than 5%, I'd probably be as bold as to say less than 1 or 2% grab my attention, really genuinely grab my attention, and are great CVs. So therein lies the challenge, and the opportunity is how can you make your CV stand out from the crowd and really sell yourself. Okay, I'll move on to, assuming we've now knocked our CV into shape and it's selling us to the best of our ability. Next logical step in the process is to actively look for a new role. So what I would always suggest someone does before they do that is actually take some time to think about I guess what's next, what are you looking for? And I've seen this particularly in a tough job market. So many people, if you've been affected by redundancy, you know, almost the natural instinct is to find a job, just find a job. What I would always encourage people to do is think about finding the right job. We had a chat just before the session about, you know, maybe looking for employment and finding the right thing. I'm a huge believer in, you know, try and find the right thing first, but have a clear idea on what you might be willing to compromise on. So if you haven't already done this, assuming you're actively on the job market, think about your career goals, short term, medium term, long term. Write down what your ideal job would look like. It may be that you can't get that, or maybe not immediately, but have an idea in your head what your ideal job is. I'm very fortunate I get to do my ideal job. So if you don't know what that looks like, have a think. If you're not quite sure, think about elements of your role that you really enjoy. Do you like, I know HR generally is a people sort of industry, but there's lots of roles in HR that are less people focused and more, you know, IT focused or process focused. So I suppose think about what do you enjoy the most? What's your motivators, your values? Think about your skills, experience, achievements. And the clearer that you are on that, I think several things happen. It gives you a clearer steer on what to look for, where to look for it, and I suppose how to match what you can offer to any relevant opportunities. And I guess if I take the opposite of this, if you don't have a clear idea of what you're looking for, it's very easy to get into fall into the trap of just applying for anything and everything. You know, almost desperately looking to get a job, and you end up taking the wrong thing, or you end up working for an organisation you don't particularly want to work with. So start with the end in mind. Think about what you're looking for first. Write it down, or at least think it through. At very least, think it through, so that you know what ultimately the end goal is. And then think about maybe what a plan B or a plan C or a plan D would look like. But at least have a plan A and figure out what that would look like. And particularly in a tough market, searching for a job can be hard work. So if you, assuming you're between, assuming you're not working and between roles, if you treat job search as you would your day job, put the same effort and energy into that, you won't go far wrong. Some practical suggestions: keep a note of any applications, conversations. You don't need to detail exactly what was said, but it's very easy to very quickly lose track of where you've sent a CV, who you had a chat with, you know, back in the old days, good old days when we could attend networking events, for example, you might have had an informal chat with someone who said their company might be hiring. Make a note of all of that and keep track of it, and work up almost an action plan so that you're following up on any activities. And as I said earlier, having a clear focus on what you want to do in your next role can make it easier or your job search more effective. So you're targeting the right things. And the more you can think about how can I stand out, how can I make my CV better, what things can I offer, and it may not be a particular skill or system experience you have or personality trait, but think about how you can package yourself and think about the tactics and strategy of how you're going to go about your job search. Are you going to have a shotgun approach and apply for everything, or are you going to be very focused and really look for the right thing? Or are you going to start looking, you know, on plan A and really focus on try to find the perfect role, give that a period of time and then have a fallback? And almost as a matter of course, I would think about, you know, the type of role you're looking for, but also the type of organisations you might be attracted to or suited to, and do you start to do some research on organisations that you think, yeah, they might be good to work for. I've talked to a lot of people who work, particularly in oil and gas, who are at, I suppose, a turning point in their career where they're starting to think about maybe a career change, and that could be a change of role or a change of industry. So if any of you are in that category, whether you're thinking of a change of career from HR, or if you work in an industry just now that's maybe struggling and you're looking for a change, a few pointers. Do your research. I think one of the best things you can do is if you can speak to a real life person who works in if not the exact area, something similar, find out how they got into it, any qualifications you might need, any training, any development, you know, what's the recruitment process look like. The more you can find out about that, and again, tailor your CV and any application letter to suit, particularly focusing on transferable skills. So that this is in particular where a skills-based or functional CV might be of more benefit. So I suppose summarising all of that, do your homework, think about, I suppose, finding out as much information as possible, and if you can, through your network or your network's network, tap into people who are maybe in that industry or that role and find out more information about how you can get into that. In a tough market, it can take time to find employment, particularly if you're looking for a change of career or industry. It can take longer. So be realistic about the opportunities. You may be competing against people with a more directly relevant experience or sector experience. So a change in direction may not always be easy, but if it's the right long-term thing to do, I guess this is having the plan A. You might need some interim work in the short to medium term, but have a plan A. Think about what your long-term aspiration is. So I'm talking to a lot of people who work in oil and gas who are trying to change and move into the renewable sector. So that may not be a 5-minute fix or even a 6-month fix, but if they work at it over the next 3-6 months, there is an increased chance of finding employment in that area. As a long-term plan, will hopefully pay dividends. Often, if you are looking for a change, you may not be as experienced, as knowledgeable, as capable, so you may need to think about a salary drop, but that can sometimes be a step back to get one or two forward. And obviously there's too many variables to talk about specific roles or training, but if you need any retraining, that can often be expensive. And I see it a lot historically in oil and gas, where people have gone and done their offshore survival and their BOSIET and their MIST or whatever standard training they need, and they don't get employment. So they spent hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on training for no reason. So again, all the more reason for doing your research. Find out what training, if any, you might need. might an employer pay for it, or might you need to be sort of self-funded? And if you need to be self-funded, what can you do to try and minimise the risk of shelling out money without any tangible benefit? The other thing, and this forms, I suppose, part of the job search, longer term job search strategy or tactics, is also think about maybe a staged approach. So moving role or industry rather than both at the same time can be easier. So there's a wee matrix we refer to. I'll not go through all of this, but if we start on bottom left box one, in theory, the easiest job to find is the same job in the same industry, because assuming you've got a directly relevant experience, that should be the path of least resistance. If I take box 6, bottom right, staying in the same industry, but a different job, so effectively you're changing discipline in some capacity, but you have the industry knowledge, that's probably more of a retraining requirement, or a training if not retraining. So the tactics, if you were applying for a job like that, you would need to focus on, I suppose, sharing with the prospective employer that you have industry experience, you're knowledgeable about the industry, you might just need some retraining, and whether you may be able to or willing to self-fund that. So that would be one approach. If I move to box 5, top left, and look at effectively doing the same job but moving industry, that's effectively saying I have all the transferable skills, I just haven't worked in this sector before. So that's probably more a persuasion of giving you a chance or an opportunity. And then if we look at top right box 9, where you're looking at a different job and different industry, may require both. It could require training or extensive training and extensive persuasion. So the idea of a two-step approach where you move to, for example, box 5 or 6, to take you a step towards that, so that you're not trying to jump from box 1 to box 9, which can be more challenging, as I say, particularly in a tough market. So some of this is about having a plan and thinking about not just the immediate I need a job, but a longer term career. So let me split the job search into sort of 2 component parts. What I would class as reactive, which is responding to, I suppose, an advertised post, is the simplest way of describing it. So responding to an employer who has a need to hire. This is not an extensive list by any means, but typically there'll be job adverts traditionally in newspapers back in the day, online job sites, recruitment agencies, it could be executive search firms, recruitment fairs, and so on. I suppose my suggestion would be to, again, if you know what you're looking for, and you can look at some of these areas and start to figure out what your priorities are in terms of where to look for the type of role that you're looking for, or the sector that you're targeting. So for example, if you're looking to work in oil and gas, there are a number of online job websites that specialise in oil and gas recruitment. Similarly for renewables, as there will be for most industry sectors, there will also be local job sites, or national, or even international. So it's similar with recruitment agencies, some will specialise in certain areas, some will be local, national, or international. So in essence, if you can think about what you're looking for, the clearer you are on that, the easier it should be to almost come up with a tactical plan to think about where you're going to look, how often you're going to look, and almost, I would say, diarise, or put in your diary, work up a plan to say, right, I've identified 20 agencies, recruitment agencies in Aberdeen. I'm going to look at 4 every day, Monday through to Friday, and I'm going to repeat that every week until I'm going to look at their, take 5 minutes, look at each one of their websites, and then, twice a week I'm going to look at any sort of specialist online job site. So almost have a structured plan, so you're not just relying on a sort of ad hoc visit to a website. Plan, as the old saying goes, plan the work and work the plan. It can be a bit soul destroying to be visiting websites and seeing nothing, or maybe not huge volume, but in my experience right now, what is generally happening is vacancies are being advertised for a shorter period of time because there's a higher number of applications. So the tactic for me right now would be little and often is better than leaving it to the end of the week and spending a whole day on a Friday looking at online sites. A job could be advertised on the Monday and taken off on the Wednesday or the Thursday. So better to be checking little and often. And a lot of job sites such as LinkedIn, Indeed, and such like, you've got the ability of setting up sort of job alerts where with set criteria, you set up a search using certain criteria, HR, business partner, Aberdeen, and anytime a job is posted with those criteria, if you can get the site to do the work for you, it may take some of the effort away. There is no replacement for actively going and looking at sites on a regular basis, because partly it will help inform you about the general market. You'll start to get a better appreciation of which sites are better than others, which agencies are maybe more active than others, or have higher volume, as opposed to maybe quality of role or whatnot. And it's back to what I said, if you treat this like you would your day job, put effort and energy into it, you're more likely to find opportunities and therefore increase your chance of success. Having worked, I suppose I started my career in a recruitment agency, or worked with 2 or 3 recruitment companies. So some practical tips if you're going to register with agencies, and I would encourage you to do that, is register with several, not just one. The way that I suppose the typical supply chain will work is some organisations will have a single source arrangement, some will have multiple suppliers. The more you can figure out what the supply chain looks like, so which organisations work with which agencies, and if you're targeting a particular organisation. So for example, our previous company, we managed for about a 15-year period almost all of Total's Aberdeen staff recruitment. So if you were looking for a job with Total, you almost certainly had to come and talk to us. Whereas someone like Shell had a preferred supplier list of 6 technical and 6 commercial recruitment agencies. So if you knew who was on the Shell supplier list, you could go and speak to one or more of those. So if you're not sure, speak to your people in your network, your family, friends, colleagues, any recommendations, either at agency level or individual consultant level. You can have a very good agency and an average consultant, or you can have an average agency and a very good consultant. So personal recommendations can help. And you don't need to become people's best friend, but build a relationship. The more that you can build a relationship with consultants, and so that they know you, and when a vacancy comes in, they think of you maybe ahead of other candidates. So balance between harassing them and sending a CV and not following up. So if in doubt, ask how they would like you to keep in touch. Similarly, check their websites for new vacancies regularly. It can change by the day. Particularly short-term contract type work can change literally by the hour. So as I say, checking little and often is a better tactic right now than leaving it once a week and spending a day at it. And a simple tip, but an important one, if we talked a lot about relevance of a CV and customizing it, you may need to send a generic CV to register with an agency. By all means do that, but if they have a live vacancy, customize your CV, or at least ask them if you can send a variation on it. And that should help them do their job, because they can sell you as a candidate more effectively to the prospective employer. So if I summarize I suppose the reactive piece is there's lots of different websites, agencies out there. The clearer you are on what you're looking for, if you can figure out a plan and just actively work on it. The flip side is more of a proactive approach. So don't just wait for an opportunity to be advertised. There's a lot, I've seen it happen a lot, where an I know doing our own internal recruitment, occasionally we might be thinking of maybe hiring a recruitment consultant or a HR advisor or a trainer or whatever, but we're not quite ready. And then someone's CV lands on your desk and you think, oh, they look great, let's get them in for a chat. And before you know it, you're progressing to offer. So don't just wait for a job to come to you. You go to the job market. So think about how you can actively market yourself as a candidate. What can help is if you can leverage your network of contacts. So you don't need a huge network, but even a small network, if you use them effectively or use your network effectively, it can lead to unearthing opportunities. And I suppose ultimately what you're trying to do here is make direct contact with potential employers or recruiters, and I suppose let the world know that you're actively looking. I'm sure if any of you are on LinkedIn, there's a lot of people at the moment who've LinkedIn introduced the open to work sort of badge. So at a glance, you can see someone who's actively looking. So little things like that to let the world know you're actively looking. Promoting that fact on social media is not for everyone. But I suppose my very simple view in it is, if nobody knows I'm on the job market, it's unlikely anyone's going to contact me. If 50 people know that I'm actively looking, all it takes is one of those people to see a vacancy and mention it to me, or pass my name to the organisation, or send me a link to the vacancy. So I suppose use your network as eyes and ears on the job market. You don't need to contact everyone in your network. So again, have almost a tactical plan on who you're going to contact, who you might let know that you're on the market. And I'm only going to touch very briefly on LinkedIn. I think if anyone's not on LinkedIn, I know I'm connected to several of you on LinkedIn. If you're not already on LinkedIn, get yourself on there. There are something like 25 million UK users. And a search I did recently indicated something like 150,000 users in Aberdeen. So simple question is, how could you benefit from a network like that? Huge potential. So the basic principle of LinkedIn, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but a first level connection. If I meet Sue, shall we say, Sue Smith, I don't know if that's a real person or made up name. If I meet Sue and I connect with her on LinkedIn, she becomes a first level connection of mine, and vice versa. If Sue knows Dave and I don't know Dave, Dave would be a second level connection of mine. So I know Sue and Sue knows Dave. And if Dave knows Sam, they would be a third level connection. I would ignore your third level connections, they're too far removed, but really think about who do you know? Is there anyone you know who is in recruitment, who's a hiring manager, or who works for an organisation you might be targeting? So can you get information from them? Or can you send them your CV directly? Second level connections is where really putting in some effort and energy can really pay dividends. So not just who you know, but who do they know, and how can you tap into that? And use that either as an information source or to give you the contact names of hiring managers. So think about how you can access them, and again, think tactics. How could you introduce yourself to a hiring manager? So maybe use a first level connection as an introduction to a second level. If you haven't already considered temp work, consultancy or interim, it's a great way to develop skills, gain I suppose access to an organisation, and open doors to longer term opportunities. And so often someone who's working in a 3-month temporary contract and a staff role will open up internally. The fact that you're in the door will give you a greater chance of success. I'm going to touch on this very briefly. So assuming you've either seen an advert or you're a way to speculatively apply, think about, again, what's in it for the reader or the prospective employer. What can you offer them by way of experience, skills, achievements, summarising your aims, ambitions or aspirations. Convince them, if it's a persuasion, Convince them why you're looking to move industry. So why are you looking to move into renewables for long-term career progression or whatever? And what can you bring to the table? And persistence pays off. It's hard work, but don't give up. If you apply for 10 jobs and get one interview, it's one success, not 9 failures. So focus on the positive and put in the same effort as you would at work. Again, any questions on any of that, pop them into the chat. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to crack on. I'll try and go through this reasonably quickly. So attending an interview, from a candidate's perspective, typically you'll want to gain information, give information, and expand on your CV. When it comes to preparing for an interview, the best thing to do is not think about it from your perspective, but from the employer's. So what's an interviewer looking for? I guess they're looking at, can you do the job? So that's, I suppose, the competency question. Do you have the skills, achievements, experience, or learning potential? So you may not be quite there yet, but have you got the potential to learn and develop in the role? Second area is, will you do the job, which is more about things like motivation, your genuine level of interest in the position, the company, the industry, your own work ethic and such like. And the third part is around things like team fit or organisational fit, which is down to, I suppose, more about style, attitude, personality, values. So, you know, I've seen it where a candidate's been great technically and highly motivated, but there may be a cultural mismatch. So, in simple terms, if you think about preparing for an interview, if this is what an interview is broadly looking for, what you can do is start to think about, well, how can I prepare my answers? Well, actually, step back. What sort of questions are they likely to ask about these sort of areas? And then how can I start to prepare answers to suit? Absolute basics. I'm hoping I don't need to cover this, but check who you're seeing, where you're seeing them, when you're seeing them. Some organisations have several offices in a city. Read through the advert, check you know what you're fully up to date with the role. Goes out saying, know yourself, know what's on your CV, particularly which version you've sent them. Do some background research, find out about the organisation, the culture, and this is a key point I'll elaborate on. Think about the questions you're going to be asked. Going for an interview for me is, it's a bit like sitting an open book exam. You know, where you're basically, you know what questions you're going to be asked, or you should be able to predict something like 70 or 80% of the likely questions you'll be asked in an interview. A lot of them are standard fare. Tell me about your strengths, your weaknesses, where do you want to be in 5 years' time, and such like. There is no excuse in my book not to have a thoroughly prepared answer for standard interview questions. Also to start thinking about questions you might want to ask. And briefly on that, there are, if I categorise them as 2 types of question that candidates ask. They ask what I would class as obvious questions. What's the salary? What's the benefits? What's the working hours? When's the job starting? The kind of obvious stuff. And what I would class as intelligent questions, which could be something like, how might the coronavirus impact on my ability to work in the office if I'm successful in this role? Something that's maybe contextually relevant, current, maybe something to do with where the organisation is, news, a news article or something. So it's a bit more thought through. So try and prepare some intelligent questions. Again, knowing the audience I'm speaking to, I'm sure a lot of you have been involved in a variety of different interview formats. I can summarise this in a sentence. Almost regardless of the type of interview format, if you prepare in the same way, i.e. thoroughly, and assume a worst case scenario, assume it's going to be an interrogation or a grilling, you won't go far wrong. Where people tend to sort of trip themselves up is, as part of a selection process, we would often do like a 10-minute informal phone interview. And it would still be a formal part of the process, but it would be managed in a quite a relaxed, informal way. And the number of candidates who'll rock up to that thinking, well, it's just an informal chat, and they're not prepared, they give average answers, and they're then excluded from the selection process. So whether you're having a 10-minute phone chat or a 2-hour panel interview, treat it like it's a 2-hour panel interview and prepare thoroughly, and you won't go far wrong. Obviously, the world at the moment is there is a significantly increased chance of a Skype, a Zoom, a Team, a WebEx type call instead of a face-to-face. So again, preparation is no different. Treat it as you would a face-to-face interview. So starting point for preparation is really think about the job. This, fairly obvious. The more you can think about the job, where does it fit, any reporting lines and responsibilities, career development opportunities, salary, benefits, culture, anything like that. The more that you can sort of gain a sound picture of what the organisation is looking for, what you should be able to do is start to think about, well, if you almost switch from interviewee to interviewer mode and think about, well, if I was hiring for this role, what would I ask? So back to thinking about I suppose that middle section, the can you, will you, and sort of organisational fit. What sort of things? That's probably 90% of the interview in there. Think of the questions they are likely to ask you about skills, competencies, knowledge, experience, personality, behavioural traits, style, communication style, and so on. And what you should be able to do is start to prepare thorough answers. If you can second guess the questions you're going to be asked, you should be able to prepare thorough answers. So let me frame that slightly differently. If I summarise that as competency-based questions, personality and motivational questions, and administrative, I would say most of what you need to do is focus on, I guess, competence and personality. I would say 80% typically of an interview, 70% will be competence-based, 20, maybe 10, 20% will be personality, and there might be 5%. I know that doesn't add up to any accountants in the room, excuse my maths, but you'll get the idea, something like a 70, 20, 10 split. So your preparation should be aligned to that. So spend most of your time preparing skills-based, competency-based answers. I could repeat what I said about the CV, but this is just in verbal format instead of on paper. Your answer should be concise, well-structured, relevant, interesting, should sell yourself, turn negatives to positives, and be honest. So 30 odd years of interviewing. I would summarise my experience of candidates. The majority of candidates, vast majority, what I would say is they give their first answer in interviews rather than their best answer. And the opportunity is the candidates who consistently give the best answer to interview questions, the candidates who consistently give the best answer to individual interview questions typically will be offered the role. It's not always the best candidate, but the best interviewee. So what can you do to improve your interview answers? There's I don't know if anyone, and let me switch to camera mode. Is anyone willing to act as a bit of a guinea pig and answer a very straightforward, it's one of the most typically asked interview questions. I won't put anyone on the spot. Would anyone be willing to, if so, pop your name in the chat just now. Don't worry if not, I'll talk you through.
I would happily do it because I, as you know, often think before I open my mouth, or often before I think. So I think I would probably be quite a good candidate for this one.
Okay, perfect. Right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the slides, but I'm going to put them back on because I'm going to type. Basically, I'll type on screen. If I just do so just take me 2 seconds to new slide. Right, what I'm going to do in a second is I'm going to ask you one of the most commonly asked interview questions, and I'm not going to give you any prep time, very deliberately. We're not going to be critical on what your answer is. What I'm going to look to do is take your first answer and show you a 4-step technique to turn that into the best answer, or in a very short period of time, a better answer, maybe not the best. So let me share this on screen again, and hopefully you can now see a blank screen with a blank slide. Yeah.
Yep.
So the question, let me just move this. I'll zoom this back again. The simple question I'm going to ask you is, what do you think your strengths are? So if you were to answer this in an interview context, what might you say? And don't worry about what you're going to say. We're not going to mark you out of 10 or judge you on this. This is really to work through an example. So
okay.
Over to you.
I would say I'm enthusiastic.
Yep.
I've definitely got a can-do attitude.
Yep.
A glass half full.
Yep.
Persuasive.
Sorry, I can spell. I just can't type.
Oh help! Now I'm wriggling in my seat because I'm thinking, what else should I be saying? What do they want to hear?
And if you want to pause there,
okay.
I'm not going to present the slides again. I'll just move on to the next slide here, if that's okay.
Sure.
Typically, when someone is completely unprepared and they're put on the spot, as and I appreciate you volunteering or being the guinea pig, having asked this question so many times in this context, you know, working through outplacement or whatever, typically you get a list of around 3 to 5 things. There is almost no logical structure to it. It's a kind of random list of the first 3 or 4 things that comes into someone's head. And I've done this so many times that there must be something in someone's brain that says, I better not say more than 3 or 4 things and stop. So typically what you get is something like this. I'm a good team player. Oh, I've got knowledge of Microsoft Office. Oh yes, and I'm good at employee engagement and strong communication skills. Oh, and HR information system. So it's a bit of a, you know, it's a bit of a shopping list, but a random jumble. So stage 1 is, right, without putting you under pressure of answering, and as soon as I say this, you'll go, of course, right. All of these are behavioural strengths. So let me think about, is there any other technical competencies, IT, and I'm not looking for 20 things. Let's get another 3 or 4, half a dozen things down. What else would you?
No, absolutely. Microsoft packages, I would say I was fluent in all of them.
Yep. Yep. Any particular HR skills, knowledge, capability?
Learning and development.
Yep.
I've done a fair bit on ERP.
Yep. Let's see if we can get
and I've done quite a bit, albeit in the past, on Toupee.
Yep. Okay, let's get one more thing.
And I've done a good bit on change management as well. Okay,
perfect. Right, I will come back to your answer. Let me take this off because we don't need that, and I'll expand this a bit. Right, so we've gone from 4 things to 9 things. So we're at 100%, 112% improvement or something like that already. So back to the example, first answer, second answer, or stage 1 is add more. So in this case, we've added people management, performance management, problem solving, comp and ben. The problem with this, if I go back to your answer, is it's still a bit of a jumbled list. So what we need is, you can probably see where this is going, some structure. So in this example, we've now categorized it by effectively HR skills, IT skills, and people skills. So let's quickly do this. And normally I would get you to work through this, but in the interest of speed, let me kind of quickly do this. And if I'm assuming ERP would sit more with IT.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Right. So what we now have is effectively 3 sections with three theme sections with sub points. The final stage, the best answer is if I go back to the original. So what I've now got is a structure, and what we're looking to do is embellish it. Maybe not enhance it. Maybe not embellish it. Enhance it. Maybe give an example. In this case, you know, I'm knowledgeable about comp and benefits. We won the Employer of the Year award at the CIPD for best comp and ben scheme. Not just I know Microsoft Office, but I've got an advanced knowledge of Word and Excel. So think about how we're going to really sell this. So in the interest of speed, can I just get you to give me, well, if it was say fluent, let me just take one of these, learning and development. What, can you give me an example of a scale, size, value of a project? You know, a wee example you could throw in to demonstrate your capability.
Yeah, I delivered a change management program to 1,200 staff, both frontline and leaders, combining a 1-day frontline and a 3-day leaders program.
Yeah, okay, perfect, right. If we had another 5 minutes, I would craft this into a slightly more polished version and I would get you to do it, but let me answer your question on your behalf.
Okay.
So if we contrast your original answer, which was basically that bottom part,
yeah,
to something like this, and this is off the top of my head, so apologies if this is not perfect. I would say I've got strengths in 3 core areas. Primarily, my core strengths, I believe, lie in my technical capability in HR. I've got a very strong, I've got a depth of experience, or broad depth of experience in learning and development. As an example, I've recently delivered a 12-month change management program to over 1,200 staff throughout the organisation, both at leadership and frontline staff level. I've also got, I've worked on a number of TUPE projects over the last 2 years and have gained an in-depth knowledge of managing change, particularly from an HR transition perspective. I would also, I suppose the second area, I would class my IT skills as being very strong. I've got an in-depth knowledge of ERP, having worked on a significant ERP project over the last 12 months. And I would consider myself to be not just fluent, but have an advanced knowledge of all the Microsoft Office packages. In terms of my, I suppose, behavioural strengths, I believe I've got a very positive attitude, a can-do attitude. I'm very enthusiastic, a glass half full, and I'm a natural communicator. I feel I've got very persuasive capabilities, something like that. It's a wee bit that could do with some polish. Can you see, even in that whatever 5 minutes, can you see the difference? First answer compared to
totally.
that.
That you make me sound brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, you can have that. Right, what I'm going to do, I'll put these slides back on screen now. I'll share these again, and I've got a couple more things, and then I'm conscious of time. I'll wrap things up. And I suppose just as I'm doing that, if the principle of that really is, think about everything you could say, take out any bits that are irrelevant, think about how you're going to structure it. So you've got themes and then substructure. So if we had a bit more time, I would have thought even about the running order of the sub bullet points, so that you start to tell a story, and then not for every single one, but think about where you might enhance it, not embellish it, enhance it with supporting information or facts. You don't need to do it for every single one, but The perfect answer is if you think about what the interviewer is looking for and you can match your strengths to what they're looking for and give great examples as you go through in line with the critical areas, you're not going to be far off the best candidate. So can I just check you can see the slides on screen again? Perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
Right. So I'm going to quickly talk about weakness, because it's often the one that people dread. And then I'll start to wrap things up and I'll take any questions. The good news about this is if you're well prepared, this can also work to your advantage. So don't dread a weakness question, look forward to it. So the 4-step approach is to minimize the weakness. So don't make it sound as though you're terrible. Reduce it, soften it. Sometimes I can occasionally be a little bit lacking in detail, as opposed to I have no attention to detail. Switch from the negative to the positive. So talk about the weakness, recognize it, but swap. Switch to talking about either what you're doing to manage it, or if it's a behavioral weakness, often the opposite characteristic. So if I use myself, I have a very limited attention to detail. That's because I'm a big picture thinker, very creative, imaginative. So you start talking about the opposite of the weakness and what you would bring to the table, and end on a high. So if you were to visualize what that looked like, on the left-hand scale, negative to positive and neutral in the middle, your worst weakness answer looks like the bottom version. It's, I'm not very good at this, I'm terrible at that, I'm hopeless at that. What you're aiming for is something that recognizes a weakness but switches into positive mode. So something like this. You might start off a negative weakness answer with, I regularly upset or alienate people. And this is slightly contrived, and it probably sounds a bit more emphasizing the softening the weakness a bit more than you maybe need. So even saying I recognize, so not I do, I recognize I can sometimes upset certain people. So it's, I recognize I can do it, and it's only certain people. So I've taken it from I upset people to, you know, under certain circumstances. And from that point on, all of this is then positive. I'm so involved in delivering the task, I overlook the impact. I'm much more aware of it. I'm working hard to resolve this. Over the last few months, I've really improved, reduced the number of times, blah, blah, blah. So if you analyze that as a weakness, basically we've spent, 10 seconds acknowledging the weakness and 90 seconds promoting the fact that we deliver the task, we're hardworking, we resolve things, we've focused on driving results, we seek feedback, blah, blah, blah. Does that I hope that makes sense. I appreciate I can't get your answers, but the very best weakness answer as well, if you can pick a weakness that is irrelevant to the role or less relevant to the role and talk about positives that are relevant to the role, that's almost the perfect answer. So your challenge is to think about a weakness for a role that you're applying for that is irrelevant, but somehow talk about. Politicians do this all the time. They get asked a difficult question and they skate around it, and before you know it, they're talking about their new policy on, Brexit or whatever it is. They talk about what they want to talk about. So think like a politician. Right, last couple of things. Reason for leaving, keep it brief, be positive, be truthful, and practice it. Don't get tripped up in an interview, slating your previous employer or your manager. Keep it brief, keep it positive. I think the rest of this I'm going to skim over, and I think I suppose summarising all of that is, if you prepare thoroughly, go to the interview, think about post-interview, self-reflection, what went well, what could be done better. If you were asked a question you couldn't answer very well or were unprepared, what would you do differently next time? And finally, if you can, get feedback. Right. Conscious we've about 10 minutes or so left. Sorry it took a little bit longer. As you can probably tell, I can talk for Scotland.
That
I'm
was
happy.
absolutely super, Campbell. Thank you. And we have had a few questions come in,
Right,
and
Grant.
it's good. And I'm really glad you covered what you did, because there was some excellent stuff in there. And just to say to everybody, we obviously are recording it, but Campbell's very kindly agreed to share a PDF of his presentation as well, so we can send that to you too. Few questions, Campbell.
Yes, fire away.
Right, I'll let you get your breath back. Okay,
No worries.
first one was, minor question, I have clients who are not British and you use US spell check. How do you think that goes down with local employers? Do you think they care?
Oh, good question. I'd probably answer that with, I've said this several times. The answer to that is for me is, it's almost beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's what is the reader looking for? That's really the most important thing. So if you were really clever, let's say you were applying for a job with a US company, I would probably use US spell check. Or if you're unsure, if you're going to use US spell check, mention that maybe in a covering letter saying, you know, because this is a US company, I've used US spell check. You know, I can spell in proper English without being offensive to any of our American friends. But you know, if you're going to do something like that, you maybe just mention it in the covering email or letter to say, just so you're aware, I've used US spell check. But I think that spins out into several different things around culture, around I suppose the more that you can think about what the reader's looking for, the better, and match that. So yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think if you're applying for a job with a garage in Torrey, you'd probably be better using Doric than American.
Love it. That's a good answer to that one. Right. Next question we had is from Julie. She says she's got a gap in her CV due to illness post-redundancy, which looks like a large period of unemployment. Currently, she hasn't put anything on her CV. However, do recruiters just see the person hasn't worked for over a year? But on the other hand, this is currently behind and doesn't define who I am in the workplace.
Yes. Okay. I suppose I touched on it very briefly in the slide. I would mention it, but just keep it very brief. And I would say something like career break, or if it's an illness, you know, if it's a serious illness, you know, that could be any one of a number of things. I suppose it's working out what's the best way to position that. Is it career break, and just leave it at that? You can always talk about it in an interview. I suppose the question is, you know, I'm going to use the word relevant again. I think where there might be something that is directly relevant to an application. So if there is an underlying health condition that, or a disability or something like that, that may have a bearing on the role or your ability to do the role, I would tend to disclose that, or at least reference it. You may not need full disclosure, but if in doubt, I would just leave, you know, say it was a 12-month gap, I would just put something like career break. You don't need to, that could be, you know, that could be any one of a number of reasons. It could be maternity leave, it could be illness, it could be, you know, traveling the world. So I think the best thing to do is just keep it brief, keep it simple, and look at addressing that at interview. And I suppose the follow-up part of that is, you know, certainly I can only say if I'm reading a CV, I'll try and look at the whole CV, not, you know, I'm not going to rule someone out because it's 6 months off, you know, 10 years ago. That's, and it's back to, if someone's got a really well-written, well-crafted CV, I wouldn't care so much about, well, I shouldn't care so much about that, unless it might have a direct bearing on the role.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay.
Gosha's asking about being proactive. Do you have any sources which we could look at to be more confident about reaching out to employers via social media? Okay,
I think there's one of the areas, the topics I run is if I use LinkedIn as an example, I run a sort of session as part of the placement on LinkedIn and getting the most out of that. If I think of the context of that, effectively tapping into a network, I suppose some quick tips would be I mentioned it earlier, think about who you know, but actually think about who they know. And one of the features in LinkedIn, if you're not already on, get yourself onto it, is if I know Judith, LinkedIn will show me the connections we have in common. So basically, who do I know that you know? So think about if I was targeting a prospective employer, if I know that Judith knows them, so they would be a second level connection of mine, might I be able to use Judith as an introduction or as even a name check? I get that a lot. You know, do you mind if I use your name to introduce myself to you? And if I'm doing outplacement, I would encourage people to use my name as an introduction to a recruiter. I think that, so that, I suppose, use your network and their network and ask people for introductions, build your network. The other, I suppose, part of that is just getting on and doing it. Don't be a sort of bystander. Get out and make it happen. And the joy of online is it's so much easier connecting with people online than it is in a networking event, in that you can send them a wee message on LinkedIn, always customize the message, give them a reason to connect. So it might be, I was speaking to Judith, hope you don't mind, she mentioned your name, she said you might be recruiting, can I send you a CV type thing? So yeah, I think the key thing is to, I suppose, if I can steal Nike's slogan, just do it. You know, build your network. The more contact with people that you make, the bigger your network, the more people hopefully will know that you're actively looking. I don't know if that quite answers it, but
no, I think that's a good answer. One from Nicola, who asks, when considering interim or temporary work, should the work be at the same level as you were working at, or at an alternative level, e.g. HR manager to advisor, HR business partner, or is this based on personal choice and what feels right?
Again, good question, thank you. I think there's several variables in that, you know, personal circumstance, the opportunity, the future potential of the role, you know, how important it is someone gets paid work. You know, if you've just left a company and got a year's salary as a redundancy payment, it's less stressful than if you're, you know, on the breadline. So I think there's several factors. I'll go back to what I said about having a clear plan. Is, I suppose, to be able to hold up the vacancy against that plan and say, does this take me a step towards it or a step away from it? Or is it a means to an end? So it might be a lower level role, but it's working for a company I'm really interested in. So the compromise, the plan B would be to, you know, only you as an individual can answer this, but is it better to take a lower level role with potential, or to say, no, I'm only going to take an HR manager's role? And well, it's an unanswerable question because there's too many variables. But if it were me, I would, if I thought there was potential, I would, you know, I'd be willing to, you know, scrub the floors and, you know, make the tea and coffee if I thought that could lead to an opportunity. But that's not every, you know, I appreciate taking a step back. You don't want to go too far back because it's hard getting a step back up again.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and like you say, it probably depends on people's circumstances. What that would influence the answer to that one. Another question we've had is a question about CVs. You mentioned selling yourself within the first half to a page. In if my CV starts with a personal statement and education, and the second page details the skills, would you recommend moving the skills to the first page and the education to the second?
Yes. There you go.
I love a direct answer.
Let me qualify that. I suppose that's what I said earlier. What is the most relevant information, or the more important information? And if you think that's skills, then I would absolutely put that on the first page. And you may find that this varies depending on the job you're applying for. So, you know, it's back to this one size of CV doesn't fit all. If you simply ask the question around what's the most relevant information for this specific role, and you may not get it perfect every time by any means, but at least if you have a think of that, 9 times out of 10, common sense will tell you what the answer is. You won't be able to second guess what's in the reader's mind, but you have a good estimated guess. So the more you can do that, the more likely you are to align to that.
Okay, excellent. And the final question we've got is, can you recommend, well, I think I might know the answer to this actually already, can you recommend sources of redundancy outplacement support where none was provided by an employer?
Well, I guess there's a load of resources out there. There's, I would have a look at things like World of Work, Skills Development Scotland, where else? There are organisations like ourselves. We tend not to work with individuals, in that if we are providing out placement, it would normally be the company that's paying for it, on the basis that just the commercial management of that is easier. What I would be happy to do is, maybe send some of our outplacement, particularly if someone's really struggling. I think my email, I'll put my email on screen just now. If any of you are really struggling, let me just quickly share this. Drop me an email and/or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to send maybe some additional supporting materials that we use for outplacement. There's a wealth of stuff online. I think the best bet is, spend a bit of time having a look online. There's loads of free stuff. So, we would obviously have to charge commercially to provide. I'm getting probably about 10 approaches a week for people asking me to review their CV or help with outplacement. I simply can't do it unless it's paid. Certainly at the moment. So I think the key message here is try and make full use of the free resources. There's a lot of good stuff out there before you need to look at paying for anything. You can get something for nothing.
And that's totally understandable. I just wonder whether this is an opportunity for people to use their networks as well. Because
absolutely, yeah.
When I was working on my CV, you kind of look at it and you think it's absolutely brilliant. Then I gave it to a couple of friends and said, could you have a look over that? What do you think? And one of them, who does quite a bit of recruitment, said, well, actually, I would move this to here. And you become blind to things when you look at
yes.
it. So getting a fresh pair of eyes, it's like anything, is a really good opportunity. And that's somewhere where it is quite easy to help people.
Yes. And, there's the CIPD is a wonderful network full of HR professionals. I could see us buddying up scheme where, if you review my CV, I'll review yours.
Yeah,
a bit of mutual help. So speak to your network, ask your colleagues, speak to recruitment agencies, recruitment consultants. They're seeing CVs all the time. They'll often give you free. In fact, I know several of the recruitment agencies in town have free resources on things like developing CVs. So I don't know if I would be able to recommend anyone in particular, but yeah, have a look. There's a bunch of free stuff out there. Yeah, make full use of that.
Listen, that's super, Campbell. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks to everybody for joining us. I mean, you've given us some great information. As I said, Campbell's very kindly agreed to share a PDF of his slides, so all the information that he covered will be on that. But again, thank you all for your time. Campbell, thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome.
Really appreciate it. And for those of you who, like myself, are on the job hunt, good luck in finding something in the near future.
Yeah, likewise, good luck to everyone. And if any of you, I recognise a number of the names on screen. Hello to all of you. If any of you want to drop me a LinkedIn request, I will, hopefully, I'm trying to log some of the names, but if you just mention you were on the event today, I'll definitely accept. So, and I echo what Gina said, best of luck with if any of you are actively looking, best of luck with the job search. It's not easy just now, but if it's any, if there's a glimmer of hope, a lot of the people I've been working with are finding employment. So it's definitely not all doom and gloom.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, everyone. Good to see you all. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.